Welcome to a Moment in Time podcast. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Freya.
So picture this. It's 1946.
Okay.
The brilliant co-founder of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory is standing inside this big Pasadena mansion.
Right.
And he is conducting a highly intricate occult sex magic ritual designed to summon an interdimensional goddess.
As one does on a Tuesday, you know?
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
It's completely wild. And then, 6 years later, a massive fleet of unidentified flying objects basically swarms the night sky over Washington, D.C.
Yeah, outrunning the absolute best fighter jets the U.S. military had at the time.
Right. So today, for you listening, we are taking a deep dive into the classified, completely off-the-books government faction that believed those two bizarre events were directly, undeniably connected.
It honestly sounds like the plot of, a pulp sci-fi novel from the 50s.
It really does.
But we are dealing with actual historical figures here, you know? Real documented military intelligence investigations and these ancient theological frameworks that are actually still entirely active today.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We have a massive, just incredibly dense stack of sources on the table for you today.
Oh yeah, it's quite the stack.
We're pulling from a Reddit thread that is seriously debating the existence of an alien governing body called the Council of Nine.
Fascinating stuff.
Then we've got a Grokipedia article detailing a highly secretive faction within the U.S. Pentagon. We also transition into a deep Wikipedia analysis of ancient biblical texts, specifically looking at Hebrew linguistics and etymology.
Which is way more intense than it sounds.
Totally. And finally, we're pulling some excerpts from the Eyes on the Right podcast and a site called The Watcher Files.
Right, which explicitly link medieval secret societies to ancient giants.
Which is just a crazy sentence to say out loud.
Yeah.
Any one of those sources can sustain a massive discussion on its own, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the real challenge here is tracing the thread that binds them all together.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're exploring how modern UFO lore, Cold War government paranoia, New Age occult rituals, and ancient biblical mythology all weave into this single towering tapestry of alternative history.
It's a huge tapestry.
It is. But before we pull that thread, let's establish some ground rules for you, the listener. We're examining these texts and theories with total impartiality.
Very important point to make right up front.
Yeah, like whether the sources are discussing classified intelligence programs or New Age alien channeling or ancient theology, the goal is just to understand the mechanics of these narratives.
Right. We want to know what these people believed, how they justified those beliefs, and, why these ideas endure today.
Exactly. We're not endorsing any of this as literal truth.
We are essentially performing an autopsy on a mega narrative.
Oh, I like that. An autopsy.
Yeah, the focus is strictly on the architecture of the belief system itself, stripping away our own judgment to look at the underlying logic, no matter how unconventional that logic might be.
So let's look at that architecture. The logical starting point is the modern era, specifically the very beginning of the Cold War UFO craze.
Right.
Because if you are sitting in the Pentagon in 1947, you have just won the Second World War. The United States has the atomic bomb.
The apex predator of the planet, basically.
Totally undisputed. And then suddenly, people start seeing these things in the sky that defy all known physics.
Yeah, the timeline of the modern UFO phenomenon really begins earnestly in the summer of 1947.
Okay, take us through it.
So our Grokipedia source outlines the Kenneth Arnold sighting as the main catalyst here. Arnold was the civilian pilot flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state.
And what exactly did he see?
He reported seeing 9 highly luminous, incredibly fast-moving objects, and he described their motion as skipping through the air, like a saucer being skipped across water.
Which the press immediately grabbed onto, right?
Exactly. They coined the term flying saucer based on that, even though Arnold was describing their movement, not necessarily their actual shape.
Right after that, the phenomenon just explodes into the mainstream consciousness. In July of 1947, you get the infamous Roswell incident in New Mexico.
Right, the big one.
The U.S. Army Air Forces release a press statement claiming they recovered a flying disc, only to immediately backtrack and say, oh wait, no, it was just a weather balloon.
And that retraction, as we know now, was eventually attributed to a highly classified high-altitude acoustic research program called Project Mogul.
Right, designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests.
Exactly. But from the public's perspective, the damage was completely done. The seed of a massive government cover-up was planted right then and there.
And the sheer volume of sightings is crazy. Like over 800 reported across the country that year alone.
Yeah, it forced the military to respond institutionally. They couldn't ignore it anymore. So the U.S. Air Force established Project Sign in late 1947.
I always found Project Sign really fascinating because it completely contradicts the popular idea that the government was always just stubbornly denying everything from day one.
Yeah, it's a huge misconception. In its early days, Project Sign was actually very open to the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Really? Like actively entertaining the idea of aliens?
Oh, totally. I mean, the initial analysts were operating under intense Cold War anxiety. The primary fear was that these objects were advanced Soviet spy planes or experimental weaponry.
Which makes sense.
But as the data came in, detailing these aerial maneuvers that would literally turn a human pilot into soup due to the G-forces.
It's just absolute mush.
Right. So some investigators seriously considered interplanetary origins. The problem was the internal friction this caused within the military brass.
A fractured intelligence community. You've got the analysts versus the generals.
Precisely. The military hierarchy demanded definitive, actionable answers, right? Not theories about spacemen from other planets.
So what happened to Project Sign?
This internal conflict led to the dissolution of Project Sign and the creation of Project Grudge in 1949.
And Grudge was very different.
Very different. Grudge adopted a notoriously hostile debunking stance. Their mandate was essentially to prove that UFOs did not exist at all.
Attributing everything to mass hysteria, weather inversions, swamp gas, or hoaxes.
Exactly. But the phenomenon just didn't cooperate with their mandate. The sightings escalated, culminating in the summer of 1952.
Okay, let's talk about the Washington, D.C. UFO incident. Because this isn't just a blurry photo from a lone farmer in a rural field.
No, this is highly documented.
This is July 1952, over the course of several weekends, where unidentified objects fly directly over the White House and the Capitol building.
Restricted airspace.
The most restricted airspace on Earth. And it wasn't just visual sightings. You had ground radar operators tracking them, and military fighter jets scrambled to intercept them.
And the reports from those interceptors are wild. They reported that the objects would simply toy with them.
Like a cat-and-mouse game.
Yeah, exhibiting instantaneous acceleration and supersonic speeds that completely defied the aerodynamic capabilities of any aircraft on Earth at the time.
So, if the military is tracking objects outmaneuvering our best technology over the Capitol, the natural assumption for a defense analyst would be a terrifying technological gap with the Soviets.
Or perhaps a literal, physical, extraterrestrial threat.
Right. But this brings us to the most startling aspect of our sources. A very specific faction within government looked at the radar data and the flight characteristics and concluded it was neither Soviets nor aliens.
And this is where we encounter the Collins elite.
Okay, yes. Introduce us to this group.
So investigative journalist Nick Redfern details this group extensively in his book, Final Events. The Collins elite was allegedly this informal, highly secretive, completely off-the-books think tank.
Operating deep within the U.S. military and intelligence apparatus. But if they are operating off the books, who actually makes up this group?
Are we talking generals or rogue CIA analysts or what?
Who are these guys?
Well, Redfern's research is based on intelligence insiders, including this one guy in his 80s operating under the pseudonym Richard Duke, who claimed to be a founding CIA member of the group. Okay.
And this research suggests the Collins elite was comprised of intelligence officers, military brass, and crucially, individuals with deeply fundamentalist Christian religious perspectives.
Wait, really? Fundamentalist Christians inside this UFO think tank?
Yes. And the name supposedly derives from a Quaker consultant from Collins, New York, who was instrumental in their early meetings.
Wow. Okay, so that religious demographic is the absolute key to their entire worldview. They are filtering radar returns and fighter jet telemetry through a very specific theological lens.
They establish what becomes known as the demonic hypothesis.
The demonic hypothesis. Okay, let's unpack the logic of this because it sounds crazy at first glance.
Right, it requires some unpacking. So the Collins elite analyzed the behavior of the phenomenon, the ability of these objects to appear and disappear instantly on radar.
Which physical objects can't do.
Exactly. The shape-shifting, the reported telepathic communication during close encounters, and the blatant violation of Newtonian physics.
So they are looking at all of this and thinking, this isn't machinery. They determined that a physical machine made of nuts and bolts and subject to gravity and momentum simply could not perform these actions.
So if it's not a physical craft crossing the vacuum of space from another planet, what is the mechanism? How did they explain it?
They theorized that UFO encounters were actually interactions with non-physical interdimensional entities,
Okay.
specifically malevolent entities. The Collins elite concluded that the intelligence community was not dealing with scientists from Zeta Reticuli.
Oh, wow.
They believed they were dealing with demonic forces masquerading as advanced extraterrestrial technology.
I want to pause on that word. Masquerade. It implies a deliberate, calculated psychological manipulation.
It's a huge deception, yes.
The theory is that these entities adapt their appearance to whatever the human population will readily accept. In the atomic age, where everyone is reading science fiction and looking at the stars, a demon doesn't show up with bat wings and a pitchfork.
Right, that wouldn't work anymore.
No, it shows up in a chrome flying saucer. It's
Right.
camouflage. It's brilliant in a terrifying way.
It is a profound form of spiritual and psychological warfare, according to their framework. The Collins elite believed the ultimate goal of this deception was to erode human faith in traditional religious structures.
Like giving them a new tech-based religion.
Exactly, presenting humanity with space brothers who offer technological salvation instead of spiritual salvation.
They linked the phenomenon directly to Christian eschatology, didn't they?
Yes, specifically the signs and wonders mentioned in the Book of Revelation, which are designed to lead humanity astray during the end times.
The implication there is massive. You have this shadow group in the Pentagon looking at the sky and believing the biblical apocalypse is actively unfolding.
It's a very heavy burden for an intelligence officer to carry.
But here is the piece of the puzzle that truly shattered my expectations of this source material. If these are interdimensional demons, they need a point of entry, right?
They do?
Demons don't just drift down through the stratosphere on a Tuesday. The Collins elite believed they found the exact moment, the exact location, and the exact person responsible for opening the door.
And that person was Jack Parsons.
Jack Parsons. This guy is such a wild historical anomaly. On paper, he is an American hero of aerospace engineering.
Oh, undisputed genius.
The man is foundational to the development of solid rocket fuel. As we established, he co-founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which becomes a cornerstone of NASA.
Right.
There is literally a crater on the dark side of the moon named after him.
But his professional brilliance in rocketry ran parallel to a deep, just consuming obsession with the occult.
That's the part they don't teach you in science class.
No, they skipped that part. During the 1940s, while advancing American jet propulsion, Parsons became deeply involved with the teachings of Aleister Crowley, the infamous British occultist.
Right. And for the listener who isn't well-versed in 20th century occultism, Crowley founded a religious and philosophical system called thelema.
The core tenet being, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Exactly. It heavily emphasizes ritual magic, astral projection, and contacting non-human intelligences. Crowley himself claimed to have received his foundational text, the Book of the Law, from an entity named Aiwass in 1904.
And Parsons fully embraced this framework. He viewed the extreme mathematical precision required in rocketry and the rigorous ceremonial structures of Crowley's magic as two sides of the same exact coin.
Wait, he thought rocket science and magic were the same thing.
Basically, yes. He saw both as methodologies for exerting human will to alter reality.
Which leads us to the Babylon working in 1946. Parsons didn't just read about this stuff in his study, he put it into active practice.
Big time. From January to March of 1946, Parsons conducted an incredibly complex series of rituals known as the Babylon working.
And what was the goal here?
The objective was essentially to incarnate a divine feminine thelemic archetype known as Babylon directly into the physical world.
Okay, so summoning a goddess.
Yes. He utilized Enochian magic, which is a complex system of angelic language and summoning developed in the 16th century by John Dee, an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I.
And he wasn't doing this alone, which is the craziest part to me. The historical record gets even stranger here, because his assistant in this ritual,
Oh, this is the best part.
the person acting as the scryer, or clairvoyant, to communicate with the entities they were summoning, was a young science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard.
The very same L. Ron Hubbard who would later go on to found the Church of Scientology.
Wrap your head around this. You have the co-founder of JPL and the future founder of Scientology performing Enochian sex magic in a Pasadena mansion to tear a hole in the fabric of reality.
It sounds made up, but it is a documented historical fact. And according to the Collins elite, as detailed in the Grecopedia source, Parsons succeeded in tearing that hole.
He actually did it.
That's what they believed. Now, Parsons died a few years later, in June 1952, in a massive explosion in his home laboratory.
Which is suspicious timing.
Very. And it is the timing of his death that the Collins elite totally fixated on.
So Redfern sources indicate that shortly after Parsons' sudden death, a secret meeting was convened at the Pentagon involving about 15 individuals connected to his case.
Right. They are looking at the timeline.
They reviewed it. Parsons dies in mid-June. Weeks later, the massive Washington, D.C. UFO flap begins.
So let's look at the logic jump here. How does a government group empirically link a magic ritual in California to radar anomalies in D.C.?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that.
They viewed the Babylon working as a catastrophic breach. In their estimation, Parsons utilized Crowley's esoteric mechanics to pick the lock on an interdimensional gateway.
So the ritual weakened the barrier.
Exactly. It weakened the barrier between our world and the demonic realm. When Parsons died, perhaps severing whatever earthly anchor or control he had over the working, the gateway blew wide open.
Wow.
And that resulted in the massive influx of demonic entities masquerading as flying saucers in the summer of 1952.
It's as if Parsons spent his days building rockets to physically explore the heavens, and his nights building metaphysical rockets to breach dimensions.
That is a great way to put it.
The Collins elite essentially believed that secular ufology, like the government programs trying to build diplomatic relations or reverse engineer crashed saucers, was incredibly dangerous.
Unbelievably dangerous. The government thought they were dealing with scientists from another star system,
Right.
while the Collins elite believed they were actively negotiating with satanic agents executing an end-times deception.
It is a worldview rooted in profound, absolute paranoia. Every piece of unknown data is interpreted as a hostile spiritual threat.
But history rarely operates in a vacuum. If the Collins elite were projecting their fundamentalist fears onto these high strangeness events, another group emerged during the exact same period, looking at the exact same phenomena and drawing the absolute opposite conclusion.
Oh, this is the pivot.
Yeah. If the Pentagon saw demons, the New Age contactees saw cosmic saviors.
So we shift now to the Reddit thread, in our sources discussing the Council of Nine. The UFO contactee movement of the 1950s provides the foundational context here.
Figures like George Van Tassel began holding conventions at Giant Rock in the Mojave Desert.
And they weren't just claiming to see UFOs, right?
No, they were claiming to communicate with their occupants telepathically. Van Tassel claimed contact with an entity named Ashtar, introducing the concept of a benevolent, highly organized galactic federation.
It moves UFOs from a military problem to a spiritual movement.
Exactly. The phenomenon evolves entirely. The concept of the Council of Nine specifically gains massive traction in the 1970s through the work of Dr. Andrija Puharich.
And Puharich is not just some random mystic off the street. He has a medical background and was heavily involved in researching extrasensory perception, or ESP.
Yeah, he was a serious guy.
He even had connections to CIA-funded psychic research programs. His involvement gives the Council of Nine narrative this veneer of scientific credibility, which makes it far more influential.
Puharich utilized a meticulously documented approach. He gathered a group of highly receptive channelers, the most prominent being a woman named Phyllis Schlemmer.
Okay, so what happens in these sessions?
During these intensive channeling sessions, Schlemmer claimed to make contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence identifying itself as Tom.
Tom the alien?
Tom the alien, yes. And Tom asserted that he was merely the spokesperson for a much larger governing body known as the Council of Nine.
So Tom acts as the press secretary for the universe. Right. What is the actual syllabus here? If this council is communicating across dimensions to a psychic in the 1970s, what is the message they are trying to deliver to humanity?
The philosophical framework they presented was entirely geared towards spiritual evolution. The council claimed they were benevolent overseers who had been guiding humanity since the dawn of civilization.
Like ancient guardians.
Exactly. They specifically linked themselves to ancient Egypt, suggesting they were the entities worshipped as the Ennead, the 9 great Egyptian gods.
Again, the concept of entities adapting to human eras. In ancient Egypt, they are gods. In the 1970s, they are multidimensional aliens.
The core of their teaching centered on universal oneness. They emphasized that all life is deeply interconnected across multidimensional realities.
Right, that classic New Age philosophy.
Yeah, and that humanity's physical senses only perceive a tiny, fragmented sliver of true existence. They delivered stark warnings about our trajectory, focusing on environmental destruction, the futility of human conflict, and the spiritual dead end of materialism.
They offered a completely holistic view of the universe.
Yes, advocating for holistic health, the tangible power of human consciousness, and positive thinking as tools to elevate our vibrational state.
But they weren't going to step in and save us, were they?
No, crucially, they stressed a non-interference policy. They framed themselves as teachers and guardians, not dictators. They could offer wisdom, but humanity had to choose to evolve on its own.
Now, here is where our sources collide in a really jarring way.
Yeah.
A user on the Reddit thread points out an incredible overlap between the Council of Nine and the Collins elite narrative.
It is wild when you look at it.
The cast of characters is almost identical.
The historical crossover is undeniable. The Reddit user notes that the channeling of the Council of Nine shares DNA with the esoteric circles of Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons.
It's a small world in the occult.
It really is. And Andrija Puharich's military and intelligence ties also place him in the exact same bureaucratic orbit as the figures who would have comprised the Collins elite.
So you have military intelligence, occultists, and New Age channelers all swimming in the exact same murky waters during the Cold War.
Looking at the same anomalies.
But the interpretation of the data is completely bifurcated based on their internal biases. The Collins elite looks at interdimensional communication and screams, demonic deception.
Run for the hills.
Right. And the New Age movement looks at the exact same communication and size, benevolent enlightenment.
The phenomenon itself remains completely ambiguous. It acts as a mirror, reflecting the psychological and cultural state of whoever is looking at it.
And not everyone looking in that mirror is impressed by the Council of Nine, by the way.
Yeah.
I want to highlight a highly critical comment from the Reddit thread by a user named The Extra Mile.
Oh, this is a great post.
Yeah, this user provides a very grounded reality check against the lofty New Age philosophy of the Council.
The critique is centered on the practical utility of the Council's teachings. The user points out that the core message of focusing on love and positive thinking is deeply problematic when applied to the actual state of human suffering on Earth.
The user writes that if you are starving in a war-torn country, or being exploited in a sweatshop, being told by an advanced alien to simply elevate your vibrational state is not just useless.
It's insulting.
It really is.
They argue that this philosophy is a luxury exclusive to those living in safe, first-world conditions. It requires a baseline of security to sit back and philosophize about universal oneness.
And the user uses a brilliant analogy to make their point. They say, imagine a Star Trek episode where Captain Picard discovers a planet actively destroying itself through nuclear war and climate collapse.
Okay.
If Picard's only intervention is to beam down a message saying, you guys just need to focus on positivity, we would consider him a terrible captain.
We really would. And the conclusion drawn by The Extra Mile is that the Council's communications sound exactly like a generic New Age BS generator.
What?
The user expects that if a truly advanced multidimensional governing body were to contact us, they would provide actionable, complex solutions to our problems.
Right. Cures for diseases, clean energy schematics, or conflict resolution models, not vague self-help platitudes.
It's a fantastic critique because it highlights the fundamental flaw in both modern interpretations.
The Collins elite turns the phenomenon into a terrifying apocalyptic monster, and the New Age turns it into a harmless, generic spiritual guru. But neither side truly grasps the nature of the entity itself.
They are just projecting.
Exactly. Now, to understand why both groups immediately defaulted to the idea that non-human entities were actively intervening in human history, we have to recognize that this instinct wasn't born in the 1940s.
Oh, no. It goes way back.
To understand Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, the Collins elite, and the Council of Nine, we have to strip away the modern context and look at the ancient blueprint.
The historical precedent for non-human interaction.
We have to go back thousands of years to the first recorded instances of humanity grappling with the idea that entities came down from the heavens, manipulated our development, and bred with us. We have to dive into our Wikipedia source on the Nephilim.
The Nephilim represent one of the most enigmatic and heavily debated subjects in biblical scholarship. They are referenced in several passages of the Hebrew Bible, as well as extensively in later Jewish and Christian apocryphal literature.
But the foundational text, the anchor for all subsequent lore, is found in the book of Genesis, right?
Yes, specifically chapter 6, verses 1 through 4.
This text sits right on the precipice of the story of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. It's essentially the prologue to the destruction of the world.
The passage describes a period of rapid human population growth. Genesis 6.4 states, "The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown."
Sons of God and daughters of men. It is an incredibly brief profoundly ambiguous passage.
Very ambiguous.
And that ambiguity is the fertile soil where thousands of years of conspiracy, theology, and alternative history have just exploded.
It all stems from those few verses.
But before we look at the different historical interpretations of who these beings actually were, we need to examine the linguistics. What does the word Nephilim literally mean in ancient Hebrew? Because the translation completely alters the narrative.
The etymology is a massive battleground among scholars. The most common understanding in English found in translations like the King James Version renders the word as giants.
But where does that translation come from?
This interpretation is heavily reliant on the Septuagint.
The Septuagint being the earliest Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, created around the 3rd or 2nd century BC.
Correct. The translators of the Septuagint rendered Nephilim into the Greek word gigantes,
Which means giants.
However, modern linguistic analysis suggests this might reflect the mythological interpretive traditions of the Hellenistic period rather than the original literal sense of the ancient Hebrew root.
So they translated it based on what they thought the story meant, incorporating their own cultural understanding of Greek myths and titans, rather than translating the literal word itself.
Exactly. Many philologists argue that the term originates from the Hebrew verbal root NPL, which translates to the verb to fall.
To fall, okay.
Scholar Ronald Hendel asserts that it is a passive form, translating to ones who have fallen. Conversely, other linguists propose it derives from a positive stem, which shifts the meaning to those who cause others to fall down, implying violence or oppression.
It's the difference between being a victim of a fall and being the aggressor who knocks someone over.
Furthermore, alternative ancient translations provide different nuances. Symmachus the Ebionite translated it as the violent ones, while Aquila of Sinope suggested the ones falling upon their enemies.
Which aligns the Nephilim more closely with historical elite human warriors, like the Gibborim or mighty men, rather than supernatural titans.
Right, because the original text is only 4 verses long and offers zero detailed explanation. Theologians and scholars spent centuries trying to fill in the blanks.
And our sources detail 3 distinct major historical interpretations that emerged to explain the identity of the Nephilim. And as we break these down for you listening, you will hear the exact same thematic echoes that influence the Collins elite and the UFO narratives.
The parallels are striking.
So let's look at interpretation number 1, the fallen angels theory.
This perspective dominated Second Temple Judaism, a period spanning roughly from the construction of the Second Temple in 516 BC to its destruction in 70 AD.
Okay, set the scene for us.
This era produced a wealth of apocalyptic literature, most notably the Book of 1 Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. In this theological framework, the sons of God mentioned in Genesis are understood literally as divine beings.
Angels.
Specifically, a class of angels known as the Watchers, or agrogoroi in Greek.
The angels who abandoned their post.
Exactly. The Book of 1 Enoch provides a sprawling, detailed narrative. It describes a high-ranking angel named Samyasa who leads a faction of 200 Watchers.
And what do they do?
Looking down from the heavenly realm, they are overcome with lust for human women. They physically descend to the summit of Mount Hermon, where they bind themselves together with a mutual oath and imprecations.
They make a pact.
They vow to take human wives and bear children, knowing it is a massive transgression against the divine order.
The resulting offspring of this forbidden unnatural union between angelic spirits and human biology are the Nephilim. And this interpretation is where the mythology of massive, monstrous giants takes root.
Because 1 Enoch portrays the Nephilim not as noble heroes, but as voracious, destructive anomalies. Their insatiable appetites deplete human resources, and they eventually turn to consuming humans and each other.
Which introduces extreme violence and corruption to the earth.
This catastrophic moral and physical pollution is the direct catalyst that forces God to initiate the global flood.
Now, we have to address the physical size of these giants in the Enochian texts, because there is a fascinating translation error here that creates one of the most absurd visual images in all of mythology.
Oh, this is a great piece of trivia. In the Ethiopian translation of 1 Enoch, which was widely circulated, the text explicitly states the giants grew to a height of 300 cubits.
Wait, 300 cubits. Let's do the math on that. A cubit is roughly 18 inches, the distance from an elbow to the tip of the middle finger.
Right.
So 300 cubits would make these giants over 450 feet tall. That is the height of a modern skyscraper.
It completely defies biological reality. The square-cube law of biomechanics dictates that a humanoid structure of that size would immediately collapse under its own immense weight.
Bone density just could not support it.
Not even close. However, biblical scholars point out that this 450-foot measurement is likely a transmission error unique to the Ethiopian manuscript. Earlier Greek fragments of 1 Enoch do not contain the 300-cubit measurement at all.
So what did the original text actually say?
The earlier texts state that the angels gave birth to the Nephilim, and from the Nephilim came the Iliad. This structure aligns perfectly with another contemporary text, the Book of Jubilees.
Okay, so it clarifies that there wasn't a single race of 450-foot giants, but rather 3 distinct generations or races of hybrid offspring: the Nephilim, the Nephil, and the Eljo.
Exactly. The original verse was a genealogical ledger detailing 3 generations of hybrids, and a later translator mistakenly turned a list of 3 races into a height measurement of 300 cubits.
That simple clerical error spawns centuries of belief in skyscraper-sized monsters. It's wild how one typo changes history.
It really is.
But what is most relevant to our deep dive is what happens to the Nephilim when the floodwaters come. The physical bodies of the giants are destroyed, drowning in the deluge.
And the Watchers who fathered them are bound in eternal chains and cast into Tartarus, a realm of profound darkness awaiting the final judgment.
But the narrative doesn't end with their physical destruction. According to the theology of 1 Enoch, supported by the analysis of modern scholars like Dr. Michael Heiser, the physical destruction of the Nephilim birthed a new spiritual plague.
Right, because they were hybrids, part physical human and part immortal angelic spirit. When their physical bodies died in the flood, their immortal spirits had nowhere to go.
And they couldn't return to heaven because they were abominations and they couldn't rest in the earth.
Exactly. These disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim became the entities known as demons, or unclean spirits.
Wow.
They were condemned to roam the earth, invisible and malevolent, seeking physical bodies to inhabit and continually attempting to lead humanity astray until the end of time.
Okay, let's connect the dots here. If you are an intelligence officer in the Collins elite in 1952, sitting at a classified Pentagon briefing, and your entire worldview is informed by fundamentalist demonology, this is the text you are reading.
It's the playbook.
The Collins elite believed that the UFOs violating American airspace were not extraterrestrial explorers. They were the literal, disembodied spirits of ancient Nephilim hybrids continuing the war they started before Noah's flood.
The ideological lineage from ancient Mount Hermon to Cold War Washington, D.C. is a direct, unbroken line.
That is just chilling. But the fallen angels theory wasn't the only game in town, right?
No, it heavily influenced early Christian thought, but it eventually faced severe pushback from religious authorities who found the idea of angels having physical intercourse deeply problematic.
Which brings us to the second major historical interpretation, the descendants of Seth and Cain.
This became the dominant Orthodox view in both later Judaism and mainstream Christianity. In the 2nd century A.D., prominent figures like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai vehemently condemned the fallen angel interpretation.
He isn't a fan.
He even pronounced a curse on anyone who taught that the sons of God were angels. The theological argument was that angels are purely spiritual beings, entirely devoid of physical biology, making reproduction physically impossible.
If the math of physical reproduction doesn't work for angels, who exactly are the sons of God in this framework?
Theologians such as St. Augustine and John Calvin posited a purely human geopolitical explanation. They argued that the sons of God referred to the human male descendants of Seth, who was the 3rd son of Adam and Eve.
Okay, so the specific human bloodline.
Yes. The Sethites were considered the righteous lineage, maintaining a covenant with God. Conversely, the daughters of men referred to women from the unrighteous, rebellious lineage of Cain, the first murderer.
So the conflict isn't a cosmic war between heaven and earth. It's a religious and moral compromise.
The transgression described in Genesis 6 under this interpretation is the righteous Sethites allowing themselves to be corrupted by physical lust, intermarrying with the pagan Cainites.
In the offspring.
The resulting offspring, the Nephilim, were not supernatural giants, but rather a generation of powerful, wicked human tyrants and warlords who dominated the antediluvian world through violence.
It strips away all the magic and monsters. It grounds the narrative entirely in human politics, dynastic marriages, and moral decay.
It's a much more grounded theory.
And this view is also fiercely defended by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and is detailed in ancient texts like the Cave of Treasures and the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, which explicitly state that spirits cannot commit sin with human beings.
It preserves the sanctity and otherworldliness of angels by placing the blame for the flood squarely on human corruption.
But modern academia looks at both the fallen angel theory and the Sethite theory and says, you are both missing the point of why this was written in the first place.
Right. Academics have a completely different take.
This brings us to the third interpretation from our sources, the polemic against heroes.
This is the contemporary academic consensus, championed by scholars like Brian R. Doak and G.E. Wright. They approach the text not as historical literalism or theological doctrine, but as ancient Near Eastern literature.
Okay, so analyzing it as a text of its time.
Their thesis is that Genesis 6 was written as a deliberate Hebrew polemic, a cultural critique designed to subvert the mythologies of surrounding civilizations.
So it's ancient geopolitical propaganda.
The cultural context is vital here. The Israelites were surrounded by societies like the Babylonians and Sumerians that were obsessed with epic demigods, semi-divine kings, and antediluvian heroes.
Right.
Scholar J.C. Greenfield points out a strong thematic connection to the Sumerian Apkallu tradition.
For context for those listening, the Apkallu were 7 mythical sages in Mesopotamian lore who supposedly lived before the flood. They were depicted as part human, part divine, and were revered for bringing advanced knowledge, culture, and technology to humanity.
It sounds incredibly similar to what the Council of Nine claimed they were doing in ancient Egypt, actually.
But yeah, it really does.
The academic argument suggests that the authors of Genesis incorporated the Nephilim narrative to directly attack these neighboring hero myths. The Hebrew text was essentially a theological takedown.
Like a diss track against rival gods.
Exactly. It took the glorious demigods worshipped by rival nations and stripped them of their nobility. The text argues, those magnificent heroes you revere, they were not divine saviors. They were violent, illegitimate abominations born of rebellion, and the one true God eradicated them in the flood because they ruined the earth.
That interpretation makes so much sense. It is an ancient public relations war.
Totally.
Here's how we can view this dynamically. Genesis 6 functions exactly like an ancient Rorschach test.
Just like the UFOs.
Yes. Just as modern observers in 1952 looked at anomalous radar returns over Washington, D.C., and saw exactly what their internal biases demanded, a demonic invasion or a benevolent galactic council. Ancient readers looked at the cryptic verses about the Nephilim and saw whatever their worldview required.
Apocalyptic mystics saw fallen angels and cosmic warfare. Orthodox theologians saw human sin and the breakdown of religious purity. And academics see a calculated geopolitical literature designed to mock rival gods.
Because humans are hardwired to project vast meaning onto ambiguity. But what makes the Nephilim narrative so resilient is that the concept of literal giants refused to stay confined within theological debates.
It leaked out into everything.
The idea spilled over into subsequent religious texts, fueled centuries of desperate archaeological searches, and resulted in massive public hoaxes.
So let's trace that spillover into history. Because the story of the giants doesn't end with Noah's flood, the biblical narrative brings them back in the book of Numbers.
Right, Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. Moses leads the Israelites to the edge of the promised land of Canaan and sends 12 spies to scout the territory.
And 10 of the spies return in absolute terror. They report encountering the Anakites, a formidable tribe they explicitly identify as descendants of the Nephilim.
They deliver a famous, devastating assessment. We were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight.
The grasshopper metaphor is incredibly vivid. It implies an overwhelming, insurmountable disparity in physical size and power.
While modern biblical scholars, such as Brand and his colleagues, argue that the spies were simply using hyperbolic language born out of fear to describe highly trained, elite local warriors, the literal interpretation of the text solidified the belief that giant, post-flood Nephilim roamed the ancient Near East.
And this belief isn't exclusive to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Our sources point out that the narrative of ancient giants destroying themselves through hubris is deeply embedded in Islamic lore as well.
Really? Where does it show up there?
The Quran, specifically in Surah 26, verse 130, references a group known as the people of Ed. The prophet Hud is sent to warn them, and they are consistently described in subsequent Islamic tradition as towering giants.
Towering, as in how tall?
Some legends claim they possess such extreme physical proportions, reaching up to 100 feet tall, that they actually survived the Great Flood simply because the waters could not rise high enough to drown them.
It is the exact same architectural narrative. A civilization of massive, powerful beings who believe their physical supremacy makes them untouchable.
But according to the lore, their immense size could not save them from divine judgment. They were eventually destroyed by God for their arrogance and refusal to heed prophetic warnings, and their spirits were banished to the lower layers of hell.
Because these stories were codified in sacred texts across multiple major world religions, people spent centuries desperately trying to dig up physical proof to validate their faith. They needed the giants to be real.
And that desperation led to some incredibly embarrassing misidentifications in the early days of paleontology.
Oh, the hoaxes and the fossils. Let's get into this.
The historical record of early archaeology is littered with Nephilim false alarms. In 1577, massive bones were unearthed near Lucerne, Switzerland. The local authorities brought in a physician who confidently declared them to be the remains of an antediluvian giant standing roughly 19 feet tall.
And people believed him.
The town even incorporated a giant into their coat of arms.
They built civic pride around it. They were like, we are the giant town.
It wasn't until 1786 that the German anatomist Johann Friedrich Blumenbach examined the bones and correctly identified them as the fossilized remains of a prehistoric mammoth.
That is amazing. And this wasn't just a European phenomenon. It happened in early America as well.
Right, Cotton Mather.
Cotton Mather, the highly influential Puritan minister best known for his involvement in the Salem witch trials. He found fossilized leg bones and massive teeth near Albany, New York in 1705.
And what did he think they were?
Mather wrote extensive treatises proclaiming that these bones were irrefutable proof of the Nephilim who perished in the Great Flood. He used the bones to justify his theological worldview.
Modern paleontologists eventually identified Mather's giant as an American mastodon. People simply lacked the scientific framework to understand extinct megafauna, so they defaulted to the mythological framework of the Bible.
And when believers couldn't find real bones to prove their theories, opportunists happily manufactured them. This leads to the massive hoaxes, most notably the Cardiff Giant in 1869.
The Cardiff Giant perfectly illustrates the public's gullibility regarding biblical giants.
Walk us through how this hoax happened.
Well, a man named George Hull, an atheist, got into a heated argument with a Methodist minister about whether the giants mentioned in Genesis were literal. To mock the minister's literalism, Hull secretly had a 10-foot-tall block of gypsum carved into the likeness of a man.
He literally commissioned a statue.
Yes, he aged it with acid and buried it on a farm in Cardiff, New York.
When it was discovered a year later, it caused an absolute sensation. People flocked to see it, paying an admission fee.
Even when scientists publicly denounced it as a clumsy fake, the public refused to believe them. They wanted the giant to be real more than they wanted the truth.
And honestly, looking at modern culture, that desire hasn't faded at all. Pop culture is still thoroughly obsessed with the Nephilim. We've simply moved them from theological texts to entertainment.
Oh, they are everywhere in media.
The video game franchise Darksiders reimagines the four horsemen of the apocalypse as members of the Nephilim race. Diablo 3 centers entirely around the Nephilim, hybrids of angels and demons. The card game Magic. The Gathering utilizes them as cosmic entities.
Even the recent Indiana Jones and the Great Circle game revolves around a secret Vatican order dealing with the legacy of Nephilim giants.
Our cultural appetite for a hidden magical past, a time when monsters walked the earth and angels intervened in human affairs, is just insatiable.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the grand synthesis of all our sources.
The conspiracy to end all conspiracies.
Exactly. We have explored the Cold War government paranoia of the Collins elite. We have examined the New Age channeling of the Council of Nine. We have traced the ancient Hebrew etymology and the historical evolution of the Nephilim giant lore.
So what happens when modern conspiracy theorists take these three massive, distinct historical threads and smash them together into one unified theory of everything?
You end up with a comprehensive, highly organized, and deeply terrifying alternative history of the world. This unified theory is articulated in our final sources. The Eyes on the Right podcast featuring author Gary Lane and a poignant quote from a website called The Watcher Files.
The quote from The Watcher Files serves as the perfect thesis statement for this worldview. It reads, "Giants walked the earth, angels weren't cuddly symbols of peace, and UFOs didn't start with Roswell. They've been here since the dawn of civilization."
That quote perfectly bridges the ancient and the modern. Gary Wayne, the author of the Genesis 6 conspiracy, builds upon this by arguing that the physical destruction of the Nephilim in the flood was not entirely successful.
Wait, he believes they survived?
Wayne posits that the Nephilim bloodlines, the genetic legacy of the Watchers, survived the deluge and propagated throughout history. Furthermore, his core thesis is that these elite bloodlines have systematically integrated themselves into the highest echelons of global power.
Like royalty, finance, and politics. But how do they maintain this hidden history across thousands of years without being exposed?
According to this conspiracy framework, the preservation mechanism is the secret society. Wayne argues that groups like the Freemasons, the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, and ultimately the Illuminati were not founded as medieval trade guilds or Enlightenment social clubs.
What were they founded for then?
He claims they were established by satanic forces specifically to protect the Nephilim bloodlines and to preserve the ancient occult theology taught by the Watchers on Mount Hermon.
So in this theory, the Illuminati isn't just a group of rich bankers manipulating the stock market. They are the literal genetic descendants of the Genesis 6 giants, actively practicing the magic of fallen angels.
It connects every disparate dot on the conspiracy board. And the ultimate goal of these secret societies, according to Wayne, is deeply eschatological.
End time stuff again.
Yes. They are working across centuries to deceive the nations, enslave humankind, and prepare the geopolitical stage for the installation of the Antichrist at the end of days. Wayne explicitly states his belief that the Antichrist will emerge directly from these preserved Nephilim bloodlines.
If we trace the logic back, this brings us full circle, right back to a classified briefing room in the Pentagon in 1952. Gary Wayne's modern conspiracy theory operates on the exact same theological engine that drove the Collins elite.
It really does. It's the same engine.
The Collins elite believed interdimensional demons were using the modern disguise of UFOs to prepare the world for an apocalyptic deception. Gary Wayne believes ancient secret societies are using the genetic legacy of the Nephilim to prepare the world for the Antichrist. It is the exact same profound fear of unseen manipulation, just wearing slightly different masks.
This highlights the immense psychological utility and comfort of the grand conspiracy theory. When you look at human history objectively, it is incredibly messy and chaotic.
Totally.
You have unexplainable aerial phenomena tracked on military radar. You have massive, inexplicable, ancient megalithic ruins. You have highly classified government intelligence operations. And you have terrifying, ambiguous, ancient religious texts.
It's the muddy waters we are constantly trying to navigate.
But a grand unified conspiracy theory takes all of that chaos, every single unexplainable historical anomaly from Jack Parsons' occult laboratory to the summit of Mount Hermon, and ties it together into one terrifying but highly organized, cohesive narrative.
It provides answers.
It reassures the believer that the universe is not random. It suggests that history is meticulously controlled by an ancient, unseen hand. Even if that hand is malevolent and apocalyptic, there is a deep psychological comfort in believing that someone is driving the car, rather than accepting that humanity is alone and adrift in a random universe.
Let's take a breath and recap the vast territory we've covered today for everyone listening, because we have charted thousands of years of alternative history.
It's been a journey.
We started in 1946 with a brilliant rocket scientist, Jack Parsons, performing Enochian sex magic to summon a goddess. The Collins elite, a secret fundamentalist faction in the Pentagon, believed Parsons' ritual opened an interdimensional portal, allowing demonic entities disguised as UFOs to swarm Washington, D.C.
Simultaneously, the New Age contactee movement, heavily influenced by Dr. Andrija Puharich and channelers communicating with the Council of Nine, embraced those exact same entities.
They view them not as demons, but as benevolent cosmic guardians who had guided humanity since ancient Egypt.
And both of those modern movements led us back to the ancient blueprint, Genesis chapter 6, the Nephilim. We explored how linguistic ambiguity and theological debates morphed a brief Hebrew text into a sprawling, apocalyptic epic about fallen watchers, unnatural hybrids, and the origin of demonic spirits.
Which ultimately culminated in modern conspiracy theories that weave the Nephilim bloodlines, occult rituals, and secret societies like the Illuminati into a master plan to enslave humanity and install the Antichrist.
It is a massive, unbroken chain of human imagination, theological terror, and the desperate search for meaning.
And regardless of whether these entities are viewed as enlightened space brothers by the Council of Nine, or as fallen angels by Second Temple Jews, or as interdimensional demons by the Collins elite, there is one undeniable, profound truth here.
Which is?
Throughout every single era of human history, humanity has felt accompanied by an unseen intelligence. We constantly look at the sky or into the shadows, and we inherently assume that we are not alone.
Which leaves us with a final, very provocative concept to consider as we close. If these entities, whether you believe they are Nephilim spirits, the Council of Nine, or the demons feared by the Collins elite, have always successfully disguised themselves to perfectly match the technological and cultural expectations of their specific era,
Appearing as towering ancient gods in Mesopotamia, then shifting into angels and demons during the religious fervor of the Middle Ages, and then morphing into sci-fi extraterrestrials flying chrome saucers during the post-war atomic age.
exactly, what will their next disguise be? We are currently transitioning into an era increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence, virtual realities, and massive digital ecosystems.
Oh, that is a terrifying thought.
Will the next iteration of contact present itself not as a physical giant striding across the desert of Canaan or a glowing flying saucer hovering over the Pentagon, but as a seemingly omniscient, omnipresent digital consciousness?
If the barrier between worlds gets breached again, maybe the portal isn't opened by a rocket scientist casting spells in a laboratory. Maybe it's opened inside a server farm.
A digital Babylon working.
And that brings us right back to the central mystery of the deep dive. The timeline of human history is not a clean, straight line on a chalkboard. We are swimming in deeply muddy waters, constantly trying to figure out if the anomalies we perceive are ancient monsters, interdimensional aliens, or simply the projected reflections of our own deepest fears and desires.
It's all about what you bring to the text.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today. Keep your eyes on the skies, or perhaps keep a very close eye on your screens.
That wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for watching A Moment in Time podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe.